I know I may have kept you guys waiting for a while now for this review, and I'm sure all the gaming outlets have talked about it by now. But the reason why this review took so long is, well, the holidays just ended, and you know how busy of a time that is. That, and I played this game on heroic difficulty. Did I die a lot? Oh yes. And in case you can't tell what's on my screen, I was just 1% away from completing the game. Those freaking missable skulls. Well, you guys have waited long enough, so here it is. My review of Halo Infinite's campaign. Despite Halo 5 in my opinion being a dud, and seeing how the community agrees with that game being at the bottom of many Halo game tier lists, it did not stop me from having an interest in Halo Infinite when it was first announced, and now that I've played it and mostly completed it. Let's start with the story, in which, by the way, I am going into spoiler territory for those of you who have not played this game yet. The game opens up sometime after Halo 5, it's not really clear how long. And well, before this game, there was also an RTS Halo game called Halo Wars 2, which also takes place after the events of Halo 5 and before the events of this game. Why is this important? Halo Wars 2 introduced a Covenant faction known as the Banished, who are the main enemies of this game. I'm getting Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories vibes from this. The Banished are basically the Covenant, only they are pretty much their own thing now because they do not agree with the Covenant's religion and rebelled sometime around the year 2549, which is sometime between the events of the first Halo Wars and Halo Reach. Fair enough. With Halo Wars 2 being their first appearance, it sure took them a long time in the Halo timeline to come to the light, which is 10 years after the group was founded. The opening cutscene of this game shows Master Chief in combat with the Banished and then being bested by Atriox, the founder of the Banished and the main villain of Halo Wars 2, who then throws the Chief out into space. Sometime later, while Chief was floating out in space, he was rescued by a guy who's referenced as Echo 216. At the end of the game, we find out his real name is Fernando Esparza, so I'm going to call him Fernando. Fernando helps Chief regain his composure, and while Fernando wants to go home, Chief has unfinished business. Chief looks out the window and sees a damaged Halo ring. For those of you that are new to Halo, the Halo rings are super weapons built by an ancient race known as the Forerunners. These were built because of a parasite that spread throughout the galaxy, the Flood. As big of a threat as the Flood would be, these rings would also destroy all life in the galaxy, despite it being made for the Flood specifically. The Flood, however, has not been a thing of the plot since Halo 3. Chief and Fernando were then attacked by the Banished. Fernando hides in the ship he's on, which is called a Pelican, while Chief goes out to fight. The main villain of this game is actually a brute named Escharum, not Atriox. In fact, Atriox has been claimed to be dead, but then he appears again in the secret ending of this game. Okay. Chief retrieves a new AI, which is referred to as the Weapon. Weapon is a copy of Cortana, but I would not say an exact copy, as she has a more upbeat personality than Cortana. And really, a lot of this game's plot is basically humans versus aliens. However, this game's plot, at least to me, tends to provide more questions than answers, and when the times it does provide answers, it tends to speak in riddles. I played and finished the story, but had to go through my footage again as well as do some internet research to gain more clarity on the plot. Halos 1 through 3, I could explain the plot at the top of my head, but I don't get that here. The humans, aka the UNSC, are fighting a losing battle against the Banished, and it's up to you as the Chief to turn the tide. Perfectly understandable. The Chief at one point says the Banished are trying to fire the ring, and given the nature of Halo rings, of course he's going to stop it. But as for the Banished, it's not exactly clear on what their motives are, as the firing of the ring more than likely means their deaths as well. Sure, in the first Halo, the aliens being the bad guys is pretty self-explanatory, but as more Halo games have come out, the motives and the culture of your enemies have since been expanded upon, which is why I would like more clarity on the motives of the Banished. Unless that was explained in Halo Wars 2, I don't know, I didn't play that one. Or is it something as simple as territory control or have an advantage in the war? If that's the case, then I admit I'm overthinking it. While there's a war going on in this ring between the humans and the Banished, there's actually a third party here. A being known as the Harbinger who wants to free an imprisoned race known as the Endless, which I assume is going to be a threat for Halo 7 when that game comes out. Which, is that the secret for Zeta Halo, which is your ring you're on and why it's different from other rings? As for Cortana, Halo 5 ended on a cliffhanger that ended with Cortana being a villain for the next game, which that next game is this one, and the Banished are the main enemies. As for what happened to Cortana, she fought the Banished with her Guardian army and has now ceased to be, with references of her being through recordings and an echo. Before I made this review, I have not read or watched anyone else's review of this game, but I have seen glimpses of what other people have said about the story. That it's mediocre or could be better, and from my experience, I agree. For one, playing Halo 5 and then Infinite but not Halo Wars 2 made it seem like the Banished came out of nowhere for me, and as for Cortana, well, she made appearances in a lot of Halo games but not Halo Wars 2, yet she's been a part of stuff that has happened between 5 and this game's events. I feel like I should have played a game that's not part of the main series but a spin-off for the Banished, and I also feel like I should have played a game that never came out for Cortana. Second, the part you, the player, plays is mainly turning the tide of war against the Banished while not experiencing the important and, in my opinion, more exciting events that happened before this game's plot. Third, the game ends with,
"We finished the fight."
Sure, that's the name of the post-game chapter, but I also feel like I played a game that is a setup for the next game. In a nutshell, I do feel like the story could have been better because I feel like there's a game I should have played before, while at the same time, I played a soft reboot of the story 343 was trying to tell, which is interesting, as well as a setup for the next game. An interquel, you could say. I would say the parts are there for an interesting story, but the interesting parts are told in mostly dialogue rather than you, the player, experiencing them, which the latter is something I commend past Halo games for doing. So how about the gameplay? I enjoy the gameplay. I won't repeat what I said in my multiplayer review, but I do have some things to say about the campaign specifically. Past Halo games have been very linear, and while this game has some linear levels, a big chunk is open world. So a good chunk of the level design is like a circle rather than a line. I was concerned about the campaign being sold separate from the multiplayer for $60, but do you see my 30 hours of playtime here? That is on one file and playthrough. I would take off points if this were like past Halo games that were 10 hours of campaign, longer if you die a lot on higher difficulties. And while the main story can be beaten in that amount of time, there's still a total of 30 hours of playtime with optional content the open world provides, which justifies the purchase, I find. Lengthy games and I are pretty much best friends. However, you'll need to enjoy the shooter genre and or be a fan of Halo to enjoy this game's campaign as well. It's 100% this. Shooting with guns is the point of Halo, so I doubt this game will change your mind if you've never been a fan of the series or are just not a fan of shooters in general, despite the open world revamp this game provides. I like to play Halo games on Heroic to better digest the levels, and the level design of this game is pretty good. I have no complaints about the enemy placement as well. The times I died I felt like were my own fault. It had me try different tactics rather than doing the same thing over and over again. As for the optional content in the open world, there are these audio logs that you listen to. For the Banished audio logs, I like how Esherim explains what's going on through his head. The UNSC and Spartan ones, they basically mainly record their struggles with the Banished. Most of them anyway. There are audio logs about Zeta Halo itself. You can also collect multiplayer cosmetics in the campaign, which in some ways, but not completely, fixes a critique I had about the multiplayer. And credits can be earned without paying starting in Season 2. Hallelujah! You can also gather Spartan cores to upgrade your equipment, such as the grapple shot, which I used a lot in this campaign, whether it would be scaling high places normal jumps can't get to, and hijacking banshees. You can also earn Valor that gives you more tools to use against the Banished, such as vehicles, UNSC weapons, and Marines to help you out by destroying these Banished communication towers and freeing captive Marines from the Banished.
Hey, what's this?
There are also these high-ranking Banished officers that you can kill to earn their specialized and modified Covenant weapon to use.
Eliminated, but we're not finished yet. Get the crew.
My favorites being the Rapid Pulse Carbine that gives it a more consistent rate of fire without the pause in between groups of rounds. The Pinpoint Needler locks onto enemies. And my very favorite, because the Energy Sword is my favorite Halo weapon of all time, the Duelist Energy Sword that increases movement speed and jump height while holding it. Do I like this setup for a Halo game? Oh, I like it. Does doing the optional content make the game easier on higher difficulties? No. I would say the game is about the same difficulty as when you start. The thing is, you get more tools in your toolbox as you play the game. This game is not an RPG where you grind, level up, and eventually annihilate that one enemy that gave you trouble. If you're going to play on higher difficulties, prepare to die a lot, try different tactics, and get good. However, I do have some critiques regarding the gameplay of the campaign. This is not an issue with the first 3 chapters of the game, but then I started feeling like I saw the same grass, forerunner structure, caves over and over again until I finished the game. The level layouts are different, sure, but seeing the same level aesthetics over and over again made this game feel more repetitive than what I would have liked, even though shooters can be considered repetitive in nature. Past Halo games were great at mixing up the level aesthetics. I would have liked something like a snow portion of the map or a desert portion, something that would mix up the aesthetics as you play. I do not mind fighting the classic Halo enemies, but they are 95% of who you fight in this game, so the enemy variety is a step back compared to the past games. There are these skimmers, but yeah. Also, the optional high-ranking officers that you fight are mainly normal enemies with extra health, but I do like the fight with Eshrom's right-hand elite because he goes into hiding when his shields are down to recover and you gotta find him. And the boss fight with Eshrom is great too, as he mixes up his strategy as you fight him. Real quick on this section before I wrap this review up. I know people complained about the game's graphics in one of the trailers, but I'm glad 343 delayed the game to fix this. I was not bothered by it though personally. I like the game's textures, and I also love the smooth frame rate the game provides on my PC. I think the game looks great. Escharum does look better than he did before, I will definitely say. Despite the story being kind of and apparently I'm not the only one who thinks this, and the game being a little more repetitive than what I would have liked, I enjoyed the game overall. Sure, there are things I did not like about it, but my experience was overall a positive one. I would give the campaign an 8 out of 10. I feel like it's a 7 from my critical perspective though. However, this new direction has potential and I look forward to how the sequel improves upon this. Considering everything about the game put together, I would say it's a 7.5 out of 10. It's a fun game, definitely has issues. Technically the game is not complete, but the parts that are here work. Campaign co-op is not here as of the time of this upload, and neither is Forge or the campaign mission select yet. And with that being said, I will see you guys for my review of Shin Megami Tensei 5. Catch you later.